On the farthest edge of the known human colonies, where the stars seemed closer than the ground beneath one's feet, there existed a small mining outpost surrounded by jagged cliffs and endless deserts. Life there was harsh, quiet, and lonely. Humans built shelters from metal and stone, and the wind carried whispers of the unknown. Among these whispers, one story stood above all others, a story that made even the bravest men pause in their work, and mothers pull their children close at night. It was the story of her, the woman whose touch was said to be fatal. No one remembered where the tale began. Some claimed she was a visitor from the stars, a being whose very fingers carried death. Others said she was born on the colony, but different, strange, and dangerous. Workers in the mines told stories of seeing her walk at dusk along the cliff edges, a figure glowing faintly in the moonlight, silent and distant. They said that if anyone dared to reach out, life would leave their body as though the universe itself decided they were unworthy. Soldiers warned each other to never approach her. Merchants spread the tale in hushed voices to keep customers away. Even children knew the rule, never touch the woman. She was death in human form, or at least, that is what everyone believed. Yet the woman herself did not behave like a predator. She moved quietly, often unseen, carrying no weapons, speaking no words. She watched the colony from the edges as if trying to understand humans without letting them understand her. Her eyes held sadness, deep and endless, as if centuries of loneliness weighed on her soul. When humans glanced her way, they felt the cold shiver of fear, but sometimes, if they looked long enough, they glimpsed something else. A quiet longing, a hope that no one dared acknowledge. The outpost became divided by rumor. Some avoided her entirely, crossing streets or climbing hills just to keep distance. Others, braver or perhaps more foolish, could not resist the pull of curiosity. They would watch from behind walls, hidden in shadows, wondering if the stories were true. And every time the woman simply stood there, serene and unthreatening, as though the world's fear could not touch her. Among the human residents, the whispers grew louder with each passing month. She has taken lives before, the miners claimed. A single brush of her hand is enough to end you, the soldiers repeated. She is not human, she cannot be trusted, said the merchants. Even the colony's leader, Commander Harlan, sighed whenever her name came up, unsure if the woman was a threat or a tragedy. None of them had dared speak to her, not directly, not ever. And yet, despite all the caution, none of the warnings could completely erase the intrigue. Something about her presence made the air feel different, charged with an unspoken tension. In the quiet hours before dawn, she would sometimes walk along the cliffs, gazing at the twin moons that hung in the sky like pale sentinels. The wind would tug at her hair, whip through her clothes, and carry her scent across the sands. No one approached her then, but if someone had, they would have seen the truth hidden beneath the fearful stories. She was not cruel. She was not dangerous. She was simply lonely, and in her silence, she carried the weight of isolation heavier than any stone in the mines. The humans had created a legend out of misunderstanding. Fear had shaped the tale, and fear had given it life. But legends have a way of bending truth, and this one was no different. The woman, the so-called fatal being, moved through life gently, touching nothing with harm, speaking only when necessary, watching the colony with eyes that yearned for acceptance. Yet no one dared approach, and so the legend remained unchallenged, growing with each telling, building a wall between her and the rest of the world. And on the cliffs, under the first pale light of dawn, she stood alone, a figure both feared and admired, waiting for a world brave enough to see her not as a story, but as she truly was, a being capable of warmth, kindness, and something more powerful than any human weapon, the gift of connection. Captain Elias Rourke stepped off the shuttle with careful confidence, his boots crunching on the dusty surface of the colony. He was a human explorer, known for his calm under pressure and his unwillingness to be swayed by rumors. The stories about the woman, the one whose touch was said to be fatal, were waiting for him, whispered by workers and traders alike. But Elias had a simple rule. He judged by what he saw, not what he was told. And yet even he could not deny the pull he felt when the colony's outskirts shimmered under the twin moons. As he walked through the settlement, the fear in the eyes of the locals was palpable. Miners hurried past, guards avoided his gaze, and children peeked out from behind walls. "Don't go near her," someone muttered, barely loud enough for him to hear. "She kills without warning." Elias frowned but pressed on, curious to see the truth hidden beneath the fear. Legends were often exaggerated, and he had learned long ago that truth was usually stranger or gentler than myth. He first saw her at the cliff's edge during the early evening. She stood silently, almost blending into the rocks, yet her presence commanded attention. She was tall, slender, with hair that caught the light like liquid silver. Her eyes, dark and deep, seemed to hold the weight of countless years, watching not just the horizon, but the hearts of everyone who dared to look. Elias froze for a moment. There was no weapon in her hands, no sign of aggression, yet the stories whispered in his mind as though warning him. But he did not turn away. Something inside him, curiosity, empathy, maybe stubbornness, urged him forward. He stepped carefully across the jagged stones, keeping his movements calm, measured, non-threatening. The colony watched from a distance, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others holding their breath in fear. A human dared approach her, and she did not flinch. "Hello," Elias said, his voice steady but soft, carrying across the wind. He held his hand out, open and empty, a gesture of trust. The woman's head tilted slightly as though considering him, and the breeze lifted strands of her hair like a silent wave. Then, in a motion so delicate it almost seemed unreal, she reached toward him. Her fingers brushed his palm, and Elias felt something he had never imagined. Warmth. Soft, alive, gentle. It was not the fire of legend, not the touch of death, but a comforting human warmth that spread through him like sunlight breaking through a storm. Around them, the colony held its breath. Miners, soldiers, and merchants froze, expecting screams, collapse, anything to prove the stories true, but nothing happened. Instead, the tension melted, replaced by something unfamiliar, wonder. Elias looked into her eyes and saw not danger, but a silent question, a hope that someone might finally understand. He smiled gently. "You're not what they say," he whispered, though she could hear it clearly. And perhaps for the first time, she allowed herself a small, almost shy acknowledgement, a tilt of her lips, a flicker of trust. The wind seemed to soften around them, carrying away decades of fear, leaving a quiet space where truth could finally exist. For Elias, the moment was more than discovery, it was revelation. The stories, the warnings, the fear, they had all been wrong. She was not a weapon nor a curse. She was something far rarer, a being capable of warmth, compassion, and connection in a world that often forgot what those things meant, and she had allowed him to see it. The colony, though shocked, could not look away. Some frowned in disbelief, some whispered anxiously, but a few, the braver ones, began to wonder if the legend had been twisted by fear. For Elias, there was no question. He would stand by her. He would prove to the world that what humans feared most was often what they misunderstood. And in that moment, by the cliffs under the twin moons, a connection formed, a fragile yet powerful bridge between human courage and alien gentleness. For the first time in her long life, she did not feel alone. And for the first time in Elias' life, he understood that bravery was not just about facing danger. It was about reaching out, seeing the truth, and refusing to let fear control the heart. The moment her fingers touched Elias' hand, a ripple of calm spread through him, unlike anything he had felt before. It was as if the warmth of the sun had been captured in a single gesture, reaching deep into his chest and settling there. The air around them seemed lighter, softer, and the harsh wind from the cliffs no longer bit at their skin. For a heartbeat, time itself paused, and the legend of death dissolved into the quiet truth of life. Humans who had gathered nearby gasped, their eyes wide with shock. They had expected screams, collapsing bodies, anything to confirm the terrifying tales, but all they saw was a human man standing alive, his face softened by awe. The miners whispered to each other, voices trembling. "It's not true," one muttered. She doesn't kill." Soldiers shifted uneasily, gripping their weapons as if fearing that the world itself had changed. And somewhere deep in their minds, a single thought began to take root. Maybe the stories had been wrong. Elias took a cautious step closer, still holding out his hand. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice carrying reassurance rather than command. "I'm not afraid." The woman, Lyra, hesitated, but then allowed her hand to brush his again. The warmth was stronger this time, a living pulse that seemed to speak a language older than words. It was gentle, patient, and full of life. She was offering him trust, and he accepted it without question. The moment changed everything for Elias. He realized that what humans feared most was not her power, but their own ignorance. They had built a story around the unknown, filling the gaps with terror instead of curiosity. And now, standing before her, he understood something vital. Connection was far more powerful than fear. One touch, one simple act of faith, could rewrite centuries of misunderstanding. But the colony did not immediately share his revelation. The whispers grew louder, carrying suspicion and doubt. "It's a trick," someone said. "She's hiding something." Others argued, voices rising in panic. Even Commander Harlan appeared at the edge of the crowd, frowning, torn between the safety of his people and the truth unfolding before him. Lyra recoiled slightly, sensing the tension, and for the first time, Elias felt her fear, not of him, but of the world that had misjudged her for so long. Elias stepped forward again, placing his hand lightly over hers. The warmth spread, not only through his body, but into the hearts of those who dared to look closer. Slowly, hesitantly, a few of the children edged forward, curiosity overcoming fear. They reached their tiny hands toward her, trembling, expecting pain. But she simply placed her hand upon theirs, and a soft glow filled the palms, a sensation like a gentle breeze that made their hearts beat faster. Smiles broke across the children's faces, and laughter rang out, cutting through decades of fear like sunlight through storm clouds. The colony watched in astonishment. The woman who had been called fatal was now a source of comfort, even joy. Elias caught her eyes and saw something he had not seen before: hope. Hope that humans could see her as she truly was, not as a legend distorted by fear, and hope that one day she would no longer be alone. For Elias, the experience was transformative. He understood that heroism was not measured by weapons or victories, but by courage. The courage to see truth beyond rumors, to stand against fear, and to reach out when the world expected you to step back. By choosing to trust her, he had become more human than ever before. And for Lyra, his trust was a lifeline, a fragile bridge to a world that had long misunderstood her. As the sun set over the cliffs, painting the sky in colors that mirrored the warmth in their hearts, Elias and Lyra stood together, hands lightly touching, a symbol of the impossible, a bond between species born not of force but of understanding. The colony had witnessed the first chapter of a new story, one where legends were challenged, fear was confronted, and humanity revealed its greatest strength: the ability to see the truth and embrace it, no matter how extraordinary. And in that quiet, powerful moment, one simple fact became undeniable. Her touch was not fatal, it was life. The warmth of her touch had begun to change hearts, but the colony was not yet ready to let go of fear. Whispers of doubt and panic spread faster than the truth. Some humans could not believe that the woman, Lyra, was harmless. "It's a trick," a miner muttered, shaking his head as he watched children laugh in her presence. "She's hiding something dangerous. We can't trust her." Even after seeing her gentle hands, some soldiers still held their weapons tight, scanning the cliffs as if expecting the shadows themselves to strike. Elias stood beside her, calm but firm, trying to shield her from suspicion. He could feel her unease, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her eyes darted toward every uncertain movement. She had opened herself to him, and now the world was closing in again. "They don't understand," Elias whispered, almost to himself. "They're afraid of what they don't know. We have to show them, step by step, that you're not a threat." But showing them proved harder than he imagined. A minor accident in the mining sector triggered chaos. A cart carrying supplies had tipped over, and a small fire had started near the storage hut. Panic rippled through the colony instantly. People shouted warnings, accusing fingers pointed at her. "She brought this," someone cried, as though her presence had summoned disaster. The soldiers advanced cautiously, and even Commander Harlan appeared, his expression tight with concern. The legend of her fatal touch had returned to their minds, like a shadow refusing to die. Lyra stepped back instinctively, shielding herself from the crowd's accusations. She had no weapon, no power to control fire or fate. All she had was her touch, the very thing they feared, and yet it was useless against fear itself. Elias placed himself between her and the colony, his stance protective. "Stop," he called firmly. "This isn't her fault. She didn't do anything." His voice carried authority, but even he felt the weight of the crowd's suspicion pressing down on them. Some humans listened, their hearts torn between fear and curiosity. Others ignored him, believing that old stories were proof enough. But Elias knew that fear was a stronger force than reason, especially when a legend had shaped a lifetime. The real danger was not her touch, it was their refusal to see the truth. And now, with anger rising, that refusal threatened to hurt her and anyone who defended her. Lyra's eyes met Elias, and in that silent moment he understood her fear. She was not afraid of humans because of their size or strength. She was afraid because she had always been misunderstood. Every step she had taken toward trust had been a risk, and now that risk was being questioned. Elias squeezed her hand lightly, reminding her silently that she was not alone. He would not let fear drive them apart. Not now, not ever. He turned back to the colony and raised his voice, steady and clear. Look at what she does, not what you've been told. She heals, she comforts, she gives life, not death. Step closer and see for yourselves. Don't let stories control your hearts. Some hesitated, but curiosity began to outweigh fear. Children approached, soldiers lowered weapons slightly, and even Commander Harlan took a cautious step forward. Slowly, Lyra reached toward the injured miners and the frightened children. Her hands brushed their arms and palms, and warmth spread like sunlight across their skin. Panic melted into awe. Faces that had been twisted in fear now softened, and hesitant smiles began to appear. The fire was extinguished quickly with help from the colony, yet the true blaze had already begun. The fire of understanding, kindled not by weapons or words, but by touch and trust. By the time the chaos had settled, a fragile calm had returned. The colony had not fully accepted her, but the first cracks in fear had appeared. Elias stayed close, knowing that every step forward would be met with resistance, yet also knowing that the path toward understanding was worth every struggle. Lyra's eyes reflected gratitude and a newfound hope. For the first time in her life, someone had defended her not because of legend, but because of truth. And as the twin moons rose high above the cliffs, painting the colony in soft silver light, Elias realized that conflict was not the enemy. Fear was. And as long as he and Lyra faced it together, no story, no rumor, and no misunderstanding could ever stop the bond that had begun with a single gentle touch. The days that followed were quiet but tense. The colony still whispered about Lyra, some fearful, some curious, but none could ignore the change she had begun to bring. Elias stayed close, guiding her through the cautious crowd, showing them that her touch was not a curse but a gift. Slowly, he began to demonstrate what words alone could not convey. Words could only describe fear, but actions revealed truth. It began with the plants. In a small garden outside the colony, workers had long struggled to grow crops in the harsh soil. Wilted leaves drooped under the harsh sun, roots clawed desperately for water that barely existed. Lyra knelt beside the garden, placing her hands lightly on the soil. A gentle warmth spread from her fingers into the earth. The plants stirred, leaves stretching, stems straightening, buds beginning to bloom as if awakening from a deep sleep. The workers gasped, stepping closer, unable to deny what they were witnessing. Children followed next, their curiosity braver than that of adults. One small boy had scraped his knee, the wound still red and tender. Lyra knelt, her hands hovering gently over the cut. The warmth flowed again, soft and calming, and the boy's eyes widened as pain melted away, leaving only a strange but comforting sensation. He giggled, running to his friends, spreading the story faster than words could travel. Fear began to crack, replaced by wonder. Elias observed quietly, proud but careful. Every movement Lyra made reinforced the truth he had known from the moment he first touched her hand. She was not dangerous. She was extraordinary, not because she was alien, but because she was capable of something humans often struggled to remember: kindness, care, and the ability to heal. Every small miracle she performed chipped away at centuries of fear, transforming suspicion into fascination. Even the soldiers, trained to distrust the unknown, found themselves watching with cautious admiration. One by one, they allowed her to demonstrate her abilities on minor injuries and ailments. Cuts closed, bruises faded, and exhaustion lifted as if the warmth of her hands carried life itself. Their skepticism faltered. The legends had been wrong. Their fears had been unfounded. And slowly, their eyes began to open to something they had almost forgotten: humanity's gift to embrace what is different without fear. Merchants, too, noticed the change. Children ran past their stalls, showing off minor scrapes healed by Lyra's touch. Customers lingered longer, watching the gentle miracles unfold. Some even stepped forward, curiosity outweighing caution, to experience the warmth for themselves. Each moment reinforced the truth, each touch replaced fear with awe. It became impossible to argue against the evidence. What had been called fatal was now undeniably gentle, undeniably kind, undeniably alive. And yet, despite all the progress, Lyra remained humble. She did not boast or flaunt her abilities. She only offered what the humans were brave enough to accept. Her eyes often met Elias, silently thanking him for being the first to believe. He smiled back, knowing that courage had sparked a revolution, not with weapons or machines or laws, but with trust, patience, and a simple human willingness to see the truth. By the end of the week, the colony had begun to change. Fearful whispers were replaced by laughter, amazed exclamations, and cautious questions. Walls that had once separated her from humans began to crumble, replaced by curiosity and a tentative connection. Children played freely near her, mimicking the gentle touches they had seen. Adults paused in their work to watch, some even volunteering to let her demonstrate her healing touch. And through it all, Elias stood beside her, a quiet anchor in a world still learning to embrace the impossible. For the first time, Lyra felt seen, not as a legend, not as a story, but as a being capable of compassion and warmth. The colony was beginning to understand that fear had lied to them and that the truth had always been within reach. All it had required was courage, the courage to approach, to trust, and to let go of old stories. And as the twin moons rose over the cliffs once more, painting the colony in gentle silver light, a new hope spread among the humans. The woman whose touch was said to be fatal was now a living proof of something far greater, that understanding, kindness, and bravery could change hearts, and perhaps, one day, even the world. After the first moments of proof, the colony slowly began to breathe differently. Walls of fear that had divided humans from Lyra began to crumble, replaced by curiosity and a cautious desire to understand. Children ran freely to her, laughing as she touched their palms and healed minor scrapes. Adults observed in amazement, some taking timid steps forward to experience the gentle warmth of her hands. Elias watched silently, feeling pride and awe. He had known the truth from the start, but seeing the colony embrace it in small, fragile steps filled him with hope. Lyra began to share her ways, patiently teaching those willing to learn. She showed humans how to touch with intention, how to heal not with power but with care, and how to sense the world around them in ways they had never noticed. Her lessons were quiet but powerful. Workers who had spent years under harsh sun and wind felt a soft, new energy coursing through them. Soldiers who had carried suspicion like armor began to relax, laughing at small jokes and offering hands to those they had once feared. The colony itself began to change, almost imperceptibly at first, then visibly as warmth and understanding spread like sunlight through shadow. Elias remained her steady companion. He guided hesitant hands to hers, offered encouragement to those who were afraid, and helped explain her gentle practices to those who struggled to believe. He began to understand that the real strength of humanity was not in machines, weapons, or authority, but in courage. The courage to open one's heart, to trust, and to accept something beyond comprehension. Lyra, in turn, smiled more often, the sadness that had once haunted her eyes softening with each small connection she made. The children became her greatest teachers of all. They approached her without fear, showing others that trust could be simple, natural, and pure. They laughed at the stories of her being deadly, treating the old legends as myths that had no place in a world where kindness and warmth could exist. Adults began to notice the changes in themselves too. Miners no longer rushed past her or avoided her gaze. They paused to watch her work in the gardens or help the injured. Soldiers offered assistance rather than suspicion, and even the merchants began to include her in the daily life of the colony, welcoming her presence instead of fearing it. Through it all, Elias and Lyra shared quiet moments of understanding. On the cliffs under the twin moons, they spoke softly, sharing stories of the stars and the worlds they had each known. She told him about her long years of solitude, the moments when hope had almost left her. And he spoke of humans who had learned to embrace the impossible, of courage that could change lives, and of the bond between them that had begun with a single, gentle touch. In those moments, they realized that they were not just teacher and student, or protector and protected. They were companions in a world learning to understand what it had once feared. The colony's transformation was not instantaneous, but it was undeniable. Plants flourished in gardens once thought barren, injuries healed more quickly than they should have, and laughter began to fill the spaces that had once echoed only with fear. Humans learned patience, empathy, and understanding, seeing in Lyra not an alien, not a legend, but a being who reminded them of the best qualities they could aspire to. Her touch, once feared as fatal, became a symbol of life, hope, and connection. By the end of the cycle, the colony had been reborn. Fear had lost its power, replaced by trust, curiosity, and genuine care. Humans and Lyrians worked side by side, learning from each other, teaching each other, and discovering strength in the bonds that had been forged through understanding rather than dominance. And through it all, Elias stood by Lyra not as a hero or leader, but as a witness to the gentle revolution of hearts that had begun with a single brave touch. For Lyra, the change was profound. She had found not just acceptance but belonging. She had discovered that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or machines, but in the willingness to trust, to learn, and to embrace what had once been feared. And as the twin moons rose high above the cliffs, painting the colony in soft silver light, she finally allowed herself to hope that she would never be alone again. Years passed, and the colony grew in ways no one could have imagined. Where fear once ruled, warmth now thrived. Gardens bloomed in the harsh soil, children ran freely across the cliffs without worry, and laughter echoed through the streets like music. Lyra, once a figure of legend and fear, had become a part of daily life, a teacher, a healer, and a friend. The humans had learned to see her not as an alien, not as a story, but as someone who carried kindness in every touch. Elias often walked beside her, quietly observing the changes. He remembered the first time he had touched her hand, feeling warmth that had shattered every rumor he had ever heard. He had known then what few others could see, that the greatest power in the universe was not in weapons, machines, or strength, but in the courage to trust and the willingness to see truth beyond fear. Lyra had given him much more than a moment of wonder. She had shown him what it meant to connect, to understand, and to embrace what was different. The humans in the colony had begun to grow in ways deeper than physical survival. Soldiers learned patience and compassion, miners taught children the importance of careful hands, and merchants welcomed strangers with trust instead of suspicion. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And at the center of this quiet revolution was Lyra, whose gentle touch had become a symbol of life itself. Even the elders, who had clung longest to the legends of danger, began to smile when they saw her work. They told stories of how fear had once ruled their hearts, and how a single human had seen the truth, reaching out when no one else would. Elias' name was remembered not for glory or titles, but for bravery in its purest form, the courage to look beyond fear and embrace what was real. Lyra, too, had grown. She no longer wandered alone, shadowed by suspicion. She laughed freely, taught eagerly, and cared openly for those who sought her guidance. And yet she remained humble, never claiming power, never asking for admiration. She had found joy in small moments, a healed child's smile, a plant thriving under her hands, a human stepping forward to help another in kindness. In these quiet acts, she discovered the meaning of belonging. One evening, under the twin moons that had witnessed her long solitude, Elias and Lyra stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching the colony below. The lights flickered softly in homes and gardens, the air filled with laughter and chatter. "We've changed them," Elias said quietly, his hand brushing hers. "Not with force, but with truth. Not with fear, but with courage." Lyra's eyes shone with quiet emotion. "They saw what I could do," she whispered. "But more than that, they saw themselves. They saw the best of what humans can be." Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Humanity's gift had always been courage, not the courage to conquer, but the courage to trust, to understand, and to choose connection over fear. And in their bond, they had proven it. The colony thrived, a living testament to bravery and understanding. Children learned to approach the unknown without fear. Adults learned that patience and kindness could change hearts, and legends were rewritten, not as tales of death or danger, but as stories of courage, warmth, and hope. Lyra's touch, once feared as fatal, had become a symbol of life, healing, and the power of trust. As the moons cast silver light over the cliffs, Elias squeezed her hand gently. "You changed everything," he said. "Not just the colony, but all of us. You showed that fear is never stronger than truth." Lyra smiled, the softest and most radiant smile he had ever seen. In that moment, she knew she was home. She knew she was no longer alone. She had found acceptance, friendship, and a place where her touch could bring life, not fear. And in the quiet of the night, the colony slept peacefully, unaware of the legend that had once terrified them, now transformed into a story of hope. A story of a woman who could have been deadly but chose to be gentle. A story of a human who chose to believe, and in doing so, changed the course of lives forever. In the end, it was not power, nor fear, nor legend that mattered. It was touch, trust, and the courage to see the truth. and that truth had created a legacy that would shine for generations.